I still remember the exact moment my entire life split into two different timelines. In one, I was the devoted daughter who believed family meant loyalty no matter how much it hurt. In the other, I became the woman my own family would one day call heartless, calculating, and impossible to defeat. The strange part is that it all started with a voicemail they never intended me to hear. My name is Evelyn, I'm 34 years old, and until 2 years ago I honestly believed my parents would choose me if they ever had to make a choice. I was wrong. They had already chosen someone else years before, and I just hadn't noticed because I was too busy paying everyone's bills, solving everyone's problems, and convincing myself that sacrifice was the same thing as love. I grew up in a house where my younger brother Mason was the miracle child. He was charming, funny, and somehow every disaster he caused became someone else's responsibility. If he crashed Dad's truck, it was because the road was slippery. If he failed another semester in college, the professors were unfair. If he borrowed money and never paid it back, people were selfish for asking. Meanwhile, I graduated top of my class, earned scholarships, worked nights, and built a successful financial consulting business from nothing. Every achievement came with the same response from my parents. "We're proud of you, sweetheart. You're so independent." Then 5 minutes later they'd ask if I could help Mason with another loan because he was going through a rough patch. I always said yes because I believed that's what family did. When Dad had heart surgery, I covered the medical bills insurance refused to pay. When Mom wanted to renovate the kitchen she'd always dreamed of, I wrote the check without hesitation. When Mason lost another job because he showed up late for the 15th time, I paid 3 months of his rent while he looked for something new. Looking back now, I can't remember a single time anyone asked what I needed. Not because they were cruel, but because I'd trained them to believe I'd always be fine. The more dependable I became, the more invisible my own needs disappeared. Then I met Daniel. He wasn't rich or flashy. He taught history at a local high school and had this annoying habit of asking questions nobody else asked. On our third date, he looked at me across the table and said, "When was the last time someone took care of you instead of the other way around?" I laughed because I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. I couldn't answer him. 6 months later we were engaged, and for the first time in my adult life I started imagining a future that belonged to me instead of everyone else. We bought a beautiful house together on the edge of town. It wasn't enormous, but every room felt peaceful. Daniel planted roses in the front yard because he said every home deserves something beautiful to welcome people. I planted lavender because my grandmother used to grow it before she passed away. Every evening we'd sit on the porch drinking coffee, talking about children, vacations, and the ordinary future we'd build together. My parents loved visiting. Or at least I thought they did. Mason came over often too, usually because he needed something. Sometimes money. Sometimes advice. Sometimes a place to sleep after another argument with his girlfriend. Daniel never complained. He treated Mason like a brother even when I knew he privately wondered why a 31-year-old man still expected everyone else to rescue him. Then one rainy Tuesday everything changed. I had flown to Chicago for a financial conference and planned to surprise Daniel by coming home a day early. My flight landed just after 4 in the afternoon. I didn't call because I wanted to see his face when I walked through the door. On the drive home, I stopped at his favorite bakery and bought cinnamon rolls still warm from the oven. I remember humming along with the radio, thinking how lucky I was. That feeling lasted exactly 7 minutes. As I turned onto our street, I noticed unfamiliar cars parked outside my house. At first, I assumed Daniel had friends over. Then I saw a moving truck backed into our driveway. Men I'd never seen before were carrying furniture out of my home. My heart began racing. I slammed on the brakes so hard the coffee spilled across the passenger seat. I jumped out of the car and ran toward the front door, convinced we'd been robbed or there had been some horrible mistake. Before I reached the porch, I heard my mother's voice drifting through the open doorway. "Put that couch in the master bedroom," she called. "Mason will need plenty of space." I froze. One of the movers asked, "What about the office?" My father answered before anyone else could. "Turn it into the nursery. They're expecting the baby in 4 months." Nursery. Baby. Mason. None of those words belonged inside my house. I stepped closer until I could see through the doorway. My parents were directing movers as if they owned the place. Mason stood in the living room with his pregnant girlfriend, smiling while they discussed paint colors. My engagement photos with Daniel had already been taken off the walls. The family portrait from our wedding sat face down on the floor beside a pile of boxes marked donate. I genuinely wondered if I was dreaming. Then my phone vibrated. It was a voicemail notification. The message had arrived 20 minutes earlier while I was driving. Without thinking, I pressed play. It wasn't meant for me. I recognized Mason's voice immediately. "Hey Mom, don't worry. Evelyn won't be back until tomorrow night. We'll have everything moved before she gets here. Once Daniel signs the papers, there's nothing she can do anyway. She'll scream for a while, but she'll get over it. She always does." There was laughter in the background. Then my mother's voice. "She'll understand eventually. Mason needs this house more than she does. Besides, she's always been the strong one." The message ended. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Daniel signs the papers. What papers? I walked into my own house without making a sound. Nobody noticed me at first because everyone was busy deciding where my furniture should go. My father had his back to me. Mason's girlfriend was measuring the dining room with a tape measure. Then Daniel appeared at the end of the hallway carrying a cardboard box filled with our wedding albums. He looked exhausted. His eyes found mine, and every color drained from his face. The box slipped from his hands. Albums exploded across the hardwood floor. Everyone turned at once. Silence swallowed the room. My mother was the first to speak. "Evelyn, you're home early." I looked at Daniel. "What papers?" I asked quietly. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I asked again, louder this time. "What papers did you sign?" Mason stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd spent his entire life believing consequences were for other people. "Look," he said, "it's not as bad as it sounds." I stared at him until he stopped talking. Then I looked back at Daniel. Tears filled his eyes. "I thought I was helping," he whispered. "Helping who?" He couldn't answer. "My mother did it for him. Your brother has a baby coming. They needed somewhere stable to live." Daniel agreed that selling them half the house was the right thing to do. Half the house. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because my brain simply refused to process what I'd heard. Daniel had secretly signed documents giving my brother ownership of half our home without my knowledge. The home I'd paid for almost entirely with my own savings. The home where every mortgage payment came from my account. The home I'd believed represented the beginning of my own family. My father folded his arms. "There's no reason to make a scene." I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "You're right," I said calmly. "No reason at all." Then I smiled, and for the very first time in my life, I stopped being the daughter they thought they knew. None of them realized that while they had been busy planning my future without asking me, I had spent the last 12 years building a career around uncovering financial fraud, forged contracts, hidden assets, and illegal property transfers. They believed they had just taken my house. What they had actually done was leave fingerprints all over the biggest mistake of their lives, and I wasn't about to warn them before they discovered just how expensive that mistake was going to become. I looked around the room one last time before slipping my phone back into my purse. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all waiting for me to explode because that's what they expected. They expected tears, screaming, accusations, maybe a dramatic walkout. They had prepared themselves for emotion. What they hadn't prepared for was silence. I smiled at Daniel, not because I forgave him, but because I suddenly understood something that changed everything. He wasn't the mastermind. He was another person my family had manipulated. Weak, yes. Naive, absolutely. But the way he avoided my eyes told me he had been pressured into believing he was doing the right thing. My mother stepped toward me and reached for my arm. "Sweetheart, let's sit down and talk about this." I gently pulled away. "No," I replied. "Let's not." I walked past every one of them, climbed the stairs, entered my bedroom, and quietly locked the door. Through the window, I watched the movers continue carrying my furniture downstairs as if nothing had happened. I opened my laptop, logged into my company's secure network, and began checking property records. Within minutes, I found the filing. My stomach tightened as I opened the scanned documents. There it was. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. It looked convincing enough for someone who didn't know me, but whoever copied it made one fatal mistake. Every legal document I had signed during the last decade included a small flourish beneath the final letter of my last name, something I'd started doing years earlier after an identity theft seminar. The signature on the transfer agreement didn't include it. Someone had forged my name. I checked the electronic submission records. The document had been notarized by a man whose license had expired 3 months earlier. I checked the county recording time. It had been submitted on a Saturday afternoon, even though the county office was closed on weekends. The digital timestamp had been altered. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. Every second I spent examining the paperwork made one thing perfectly clear. This wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. Sloppy fraud. I took screenshots of everything before printing copies through my secure office connection. Then I called the only person I trusted completely, my college roommate Olivia, now one of the best real estate attorneys in the state. She answered on the second ring. "You sound calm," she said after hearing my voice. "That's usually bad." I explained everything without interruption. When I finished, she was silent for several seconds. Finally, she laughed once. "They're in trouble." "How much trouble?" I asked. "The kind where nobody sleeps for a very long time." She told me not to confront anyone, not to threaten lawsuits, not to reveal what I discovered. "People who think they've already won become careless," she said. "Let them celebrate." That evening I packed a single suitcase while everyone downstairs continued arranging my house for Mason's new family. Before leaving, I walked back into the living room. My parents looked almost relieved to see the luggage. My mother hugged me, assuming I'd accepted reality. "You'll understand someday," she whispered. I hugged her back. "You're right," I said softly. "One of us will." Then I left. I checked into a small hotel across town and spent the next 3 days building the strongest legal case of my career. Every financial record connected to the house was in my possession because I had always handled the payments. Every mortgage installment came from my personal account. Every renovation invoice bore my signature. Daniel had contributed less than 15% toward the purchase price. Mason had contributed nothing. Then Olivia uncovered something even bigger. The power of attorney Daniel had used to authorize the transfer wasn't valid because it referenced a document that had never existed. Someone had literally invented legal authority out of thin air. By the end of the week, we had assembled enough evidence to involve not only civil court, but criminal investigators. Still, I stayed silent. Meanwhile, my family believed they had won. Social media made that painfully obvious. My mother posted smiling pictures of Mason and his girlfriend standing in my kitchen with the caption, "So proud of our growing family and their beautiful new beginning." Friends congratulated them without realizing whose home they were celebrating. Mason uploaded a video giving viewers a tour of what he proudly called our forever house. I watched every second, saving copies before they could delete them later. Then came the final mistake. During the video, he proudly held up the property documents, laughing that he was finally a homeowner. He unknowingly displayed the forged signature clearly enough for anyone to compare it with authentic records. Olivia called me immediately after seeing the clip. "Tell me you downloaded that." "Already done." "Perfect." 2 weeks later, the sheriff's department arrived at the house just before breakfast. According to the incident report I later obtained, my father answered the door expecting a package. Instead, he found 2 detectives, a fraud investigator, and representatives from the county recorder's office. They spent nearly 4 hours inside collecting computers, phones, and every document related to the property transfer. Mason called me 23 times that day. I ignored every call. My mother left frantic voicemails begging me to explain what was happening. Daniel sent a single message. "I didn't know they forged your signature." I swear, it was the first truthful thing he'd said in weeks. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected because the evidence was overwhelming. The fake notarization, altered timestamps, forged signatures, invalid power of attorney, and financial misrepresentations created a trail even a first-year investigator could follow. 1 month later, the court issued an emergency order reversing the property transfer pending trial. Mason and his girlfriend were instructed to vacate the house within 48 hours. They refused. 24 hours after that, deputies arrived with another order. Watching from a car parked down the street, I saw my brother carry boxes onto the lawn while shouting that everyone had betrayed him. My mother cried. My father argued with deputies. Daniel sat alone on the porch staring at the ground. Nobody noticed me. They were too busy watching the life they'd tried to steal disappear one box at a time. The criminal proceedings began shortly afterward. During testimony, the truth finally surfaced. My mother admitted she had encouraged Daniel to sign because she believed I would forgive everyone eventually. My father admitted he never read the paperwork before telling Mason everything was legal. Mason insisted he thought I had agreed. Then prosecutors played the voicemail from my phone. The courtroom fell completely silent as everyone heard my mother's voice saying, "She'll get over it. She always does." Even the judge looked visibly unimpressed. Daniel accepted responsibility for signing documents he never understood and cooperated fully with investigators. His honesty earned him leniency. The others weren't so fortunate. Civil judgments required Mason to repay every dollar spent on moving costs, renovations, and legal fees. My parents lost much of their retirement savings helping cover penalties and settlements. Criminal convictions for document fraud permanently damaged Mason's employment prospects. My mother resigned from every community organization she belonged to after local newspapers reported the case. My father stopped attending neighborhood gatherings altogether. As for Daniel, our marriage ended quietly 6 months later. During the divorce hearing, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I loved you." I was just too weak to stand up to them. I believed him. Love without courage, however, isn't enough to build a life on. I wished him well and walked away without anger. A year later, I stood once again on the front porch of my house. The roses Daniel had planted were blooming brighter than ever. The lavender filled the air with the same peaceful scent my grandmother used to love. I had renovated the interior completely, not because I wanted to erase the memories, but because I wanted every room to belong to the woman I'd become instead of the one who had spent years believing love had to be earned through sacrifice. I no longer answered late-night calls asking for money. I no longer apologized for saying no. I no longer confused being needed with being loved. Every now and then someone asks if I regret exposing my own family. I always give the same answer. I didn't destroy my family. I simply stopped protecting the lies that were holding it together. The truth did everything else. And if there's one lesson I hope people remember from my story, it's this: the kindest person in the room is often the strongest, but the moment that kindness is mistaken for weakness, everything changes. Because people who spend years quietly carrying everyone else's burdens also know exactly where those burdens came from and exactly how to put them back where they belong.